Year after year, St. Louis, Missouri continues to be one of the most dangerous cities in the entire United States. What if I told you across this bridge is an even more dangerous city? As we cross this bridge, we enter Illinois into East St. Louis. This is a place many people say they wouldn't even want to drive through. Is East St. Louis as bad as people say, or is it being given an unfair reputation? In today's video, I'll let you guys decide for yourselves as we explore East St. Louis, Illinois. At one point, East St. Louis was a thriving industrial town. Many industrial plants were created here due to the railroads and the amount of flat land that was available. Factories ran 24 hours a day and jobs were abundant. As more and more people came here for jobs, there was a shift in the demographics of East St. Louis. Most of the incoming population was composed of immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe and African Americans from the South. In 1917, riots broke out in East St. Louis. Racial tension had been simmering for quite some time in the area. During the spring of 1917, African Americans were moving to East St. Louis at a rate of 2,000 per week. When mostly white factory workers would attempt to go on strike for better pay, companies would hire African Americans who came in as they would normally accept lower wages. White factory workers did not like this, their strikes were not working, and they were being replaced. Eventually, a car full of white men went to the black part of town and began opening fire. Later, two detectives of the East St. Louis Police Department were driving through the same area and they were shot and killed. The next day, thousands of white spectators gathered to see the detectives' blood-stained car. After seeing this, the crowd began rioting. Somewhere between 39 and 100 African Americans were killed during these riots. Now, as bad as that is, and despite this happening, the population here actually continued to double each decade through the first half of the 1900s. The city was doing pretty well up until the 1960s. One reason for East St. Louis's decline was that the city lost advantage of its location. The rail system in the city, a big reason for its success, became less important as trucking became a more popular mode of transportation. East St. Louis did become a focus for major highways and interstates, but the railroads that once made the city great were now responsible for backing up traffic. East St. Louis began to decline in the 1960s when industries began leaving for opportunities elsewhere. Between 1960 and 1970, the city lost nearly 70% of its businesses. Unemployment soared. Residents moved out of town. The population drain continued for years. Between 1970 and 2000, the city lost 55% of its population. Many people found themselves without jobs and crime started increasing. This set off a chain reaction because the rise of crime led to even more stores and businesses leaving. Another problem in East St. Louis is and has been the leadership and the police force, and we're going to take a look at a few examples of that. The police force in East St. Louis has proven to be full of corruption in the past. Let's take a look at the first example. In May of 2011, Michael Baxton was hired to serve as the police chief. This was a spot needing to be filled because the previous police chief, Robert L. Cummings, pled guilty to federal tax crimes. So Baxton served as the chief of police until October of 2011, when it was discovered that he had actually received 2 felony convictions in 1982. They fired Baxton because of this, but then they rehired him in 2011. A year after being rehired, he was sentenced to prison for stealing boxes of Xbox games planted by federal agents in a sting operation. So the police chief they had in charge had to be fired because of federal tax crimes. Then they replaced him with another police chief only to find out he had felony convictions, rehire the guy with the felonies, and then he goes and steals Xbox games. You can't expect to run a city successfully when these are the types of people you have in charge of stopping crime. Let's take a look at another example of what I'm talking about here. In 2012, an East St. Louis police officer pulled over a woman who was driving drunk with an open container of alcohol and had no license and no insurance. Instead of arresting the woman, the police officer went to a local park with her and had her perform oral on him. The police officer then lied about this when he was asked about it by federal agents. I found a video from 2019 where a teenager is sleeping in a holding cell and a police officer walks in and pepper sprays him in the face for absolutely no reason. Another problem is that the East St. Louis police force is pretty small, and as you can imagine, they have to respond to a lot of calls. The city also does not have a lot of money to fix this problem either. The leadership in East St. Louis has proven to be one of its problems time and time again. Many people look at the abandoned buildings in this town and wonder if they could be repurposed. Could new businesses have a chance at success in East St. Louis? A few years ago, a shooting happened in East St. Louis at a gas station, and the response from the mayor was to shut down the gas station.
Follow the laws or you'll be forced to close. That's a strong message being sent tonight in East St. Louis to local businesses.
But one owner says it's not just that simple. He was forced to close after a shooting at this gas station sent a bullet through the nearby City Hall window.
The owner of this gas station tells me that this is harassment. He placed these signs up earlier today thanking the mayor for shutting down his business, while we went across the street and spoke with the mayor, who tells us that they're just taking a zero tolerance stand when it comes to addressing violence in this area.
How can you invite the business people to come to your city and you shutting businesses down?
It's too risky for a business to come in here and operate. As I was doing research for this video, I came across another instance of corruption that happened very recently. The East St. Louis city manager, Carlos Mayfield, was accused of using city funds for his own personal gain.
New at 4, Illinois State Police have arrested the former East St. Louis city manager, Carlos Mayfield. Police say Mayfield used city funds from East St. Louis for personal gain. According to police, Mayfield knowingly used between $500 and $10,000 in city money.
He ended up turning himself in on November 15th of this year. Some corruption was present even when East St. Louis was doing well. During the period of intense industrial activity, there was no pollution control in the city. About 116 industries handled hazardous materials, and the disposal of industrial waste decimated the local environment, making some of the sites unusable. Also in the past, large industries found loopholes to avoid paying taxes to East St. Louis. Now that we've covered the history of the city, the police force, and the leadership, we're going to take an in-depth look at some of East St. Louis's abandoned buildings. Up first, the Spivey Building. The Spivey Building is East St. Louis's first and only skyscraper. Believe it or not, this building was once extremely nice. It was built in 1927 by the owner of the East St. Louis Journal, Alan Spivey. Alan ran his newspaper from the Journal building connected to it. The upper floors of the Spivey Building held offices for doctors, lawyers, dentists, and other businesses. The skyscraper was built with optimism for the future. The hope was that after building something so grand, more big buildings would come soon after. Unfortunately, this was not the case. People began leaving as the city declined, and the building's last tenant moved out in 1980. Ever since then, the building has sat vacant, crumbling to pieces. And when I say crumbling to pieces, I really mean that. At one point, they had the street in front of the building blocked off because of all the falling bricks. This is a clip from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch of a pile of bricks falling off the building and nearly hitting a car. The next building we're going to take a look at is the Majestic Theater. The Majestic Theater opened on February 26th of 1928. This was also a beautiful building back in its day. The theater sat a little over 1,700 people. They held vaudeville performances and was also one of the first theaters in the area to have talking motion pictures. The Majestic Theater closed in 1960 due to declining ticket sales and rising operating expenses. This was right around the time when many other businesses and residents started moving out of town as well. Over the years, proposals have been put forward to restore the theater, and some renovations were made to the building in the 1970s. Despite these renovations, and a whole website dedicated to restoring the theater, the building never got the chance to be used again. The third and final abandoned building we're going inside of is the Union Trust Bank Company building. This building was not as easy to get into as the other two we explored, but here we are. This was built between 1922 and 1926, shortly after the East St. Louis riots. This building was really well done, and you can tell the architect paid attention to the details. This building is a good example of the classic revival architecture style, which is normally characterized by the use of columns, symmetry and proportion, and domed and vaulted interiors. The bank was vacated in the mid-1990s, and like many East St. Louis buildings, has sat empty ever since. It really is crazy to look around at an area like this and to know that it was once thriving. An area like this was once full of businesses, opportunities, and chances for a better life. I, as well as many other people, would love to see East St. Louis improve from the state that it's in now. It's hard to say if this is possible, but I do know that many big changes would have to be made for the city to be brought back to life. to even stand a chance at being close to what it used to be.